Many Americans would agree that our economic system has, well, played us. And my guest today argues that none have been played for so long, or to such detriment, as women. Screwnomics, or the economic theory that women should always work for less, or better, for free, ahead on Wide Angle. Economics at the macro level, that is, on the national and international scenes, is waged as a competition, replete with a vocabulary of war, and for over 2 millennia has been the sole purview of men. Yet, at the micro level, those places we actually live our lives, where economics are about nourishing bodies, housing families, and building communities, women have been the primary caretakers and economists across the ages. Could we invest the policies that decide our economic fates with some of the personal human concern we experience growing up around the hearth? And might women help guide such a transition? Joining me from her home in Montpelier, Vermont to help answer such questions is Rickey Gard Diamond. Rickey began her writing career in the midst of the big political changes and growing American differences of the 1980s and has kept her eye on the political and economic scenes ever since, publishing just recently her book, Screwnomics, How Our Economy Works Against Women and Real Ways to Make Lasting Change. Welcome to Wide Angle, Rickey.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. That was a lovely introduction.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Your book certainly gave rise to those thoughts. So let's start at the beginning if we can, Rickey. While economics certainly impacts us all, you contend that gender makes a significant difference on how we're impacted. For viewers, and I imagine there are many, who don't think of economics as a gendered issue, how is that? How did you come to that conclusion in Screwnomics?
Well, I suppose I came to that because I am a woman and I had a different experience than, say, my ex-husband. Back in 1979, when I was a single mom with 3 kids, I worked full-time, and I even had $25 a week in child support, and I couldn't make my budget work. Yeah. I thought it was something wrong with me. Right. I wasn't doing something right. I was terribly ashamed, and I didn't learn until years later that at the time, women as a group, on average, were making 59 cents to a man's dollar on the job. That explained a great deal. Sure. But I didn't know that at the time. Right. And so that kind of loss of confidence, I think, was kind of a steady message that somehow that realm of money was not mine.
Right. You're talking about your personal economic story, as it were. Right. Yes?
Starts and what does that have to do with economics?
Right, exactly that. I mean, I think generally we think of economics as sort of a removed, impersonal study, and yet you're certainly suggesting that everybody has an economic story. You start yours in the book in 1979 at the State Welfare Office. Right. How do you think an introduction of our personal stories around economics sort of changes how we think of the subject?
Well, I think the economy, as you're describing it in this, it's this ivory tower kind of intellectual discipline. Right. Removes all emotion and all context. It's only looking at perhaps labels. I was a single mother of 3. That was my label. But there was much more to my story than that. Any story is always about conflict and about purpose and about a good many things that makes us human. Sure. But those generally don't make it into the economic theories, which is why I had to come up with the word Screwnomics. Which generally makes people laugh. Sure. Rightfully so. It describes something that's kind of absurd, but it was what I saw all around me as I learned more and more, that it's the economic theory that women should always work for less or better for free.
Right.
And women in that case means our Mother Earth. It means those girly men out there, and I mean that as a compliment,
Right.
who are teaching or nursing or who are taking care of their kids or cooking dinner. They all are expected to do that for free without value given it in our culture.
Right, right. We certainly find ourselves, Rickey, at a very particular moment in our history, yeah, when I think many powerful men are at least beginning to be brought to be called out and responsible for their behavior, ill behavior towards women. How do you connect the Me Too movement to the economic marginalization that you're illuminating in your book?
It's very much connected.
Yeah.
Screwing is not lovemaking. It is to force someone in an intimate way and a shaming way. There are emotions involved with that.
Right.
To show that you care nothing about that person. And to be screwed is essentially to be made female, whatever your sexual orientation or your gender.
Interesting. Let's look at the development, and I pulled it out of the book. The development of a word that we use frequently, housework is the word. It wasn't a word that was really in our lexicon until the age of industrialization. And
Everyone
yet, what's that?
Everyone worked at home.
Exactly that. And then as jobs shifted and people were drawn away, then we would look at it specifically. What hasn't changed, I gather, since that time, however, is that although it's a significant domain of work, it remains outside of the formal economy. And in that sense, not recognized as carrying with it value. Yeah. So I have two questions in that line. Why has it been marginalized for such a long time, do you think? And the follow-up to that is, if we did recognize it, what changes would come to our economy and our way of thinking about that important work?
I would say that it has been marginalized because the economy has been a man-to-man conversation for about 2,500 years.
Right.
And not only a man-to-man conversation, but a particular man of a particular class, a particular race, a particular mindset.
Right.
And he owned a good many women because women and her sexual reproductive powers were the first property. You know, we think of that moment in the wedding when the father gives the bride to the groom, which is an affectionate gesture today.
Right. Yes.
But it has a long history. And when you look closely at ancient civilizations, you see that slavery and concubinage were at the base, the foundation stone of that kind of property owning. Right. Women were the first.
Right. Let's take a break right there, Rickey, and we'll invite viewers to join us on the other side, where we'll discuss ways in which we might rebuild our economy piece by piece to meet human needs.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at wideangle@acmi.tv. For information about this episode or to view other Wide Angle episodes, visit us online at acmi.tv/wideangle.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I am Peter Bermudez talking today with Rickey Gard Diamond, not only about Screwnomics, the economic theory that women should always work for less, but how we might create a new form of economics that works for us all. All right, Here we are back, and I was suggesting at the end of the first half, Rickey, that our conversation would go into ways that we can create a new economy, piece by piece, as it were. One of the things that you speak to in the book that I think is absolutely brilliant, so I want viewers to hear it as well, is you take the notion of the gross national product. So it's a measure that our governments currently use to determine how healthy a particular economy is. Yeah.
Right.
And effectively, it uses the exchange of money as the means of measurement. So the more money the economy spends, the healthier the economy.
Right.
However, you are certainly quick to point out that it doesn't matter whether that money is spent on homes to house people, food to feed them, or bombs to destroy them. Yeah, and I think viscerally we would have different responses to those three possibilities, those three ways to spend money. If not a metric like gross national product, what other measures are there out there being experimented with, perhaps, that might better capture what it is we want to measure about our economy and our production of goods and services and exchanges with our friends and communities?
Well, there are a number of new measures and many countries that are experimenting with gathering additional data because they're aware that money alone doesn't measure our well-being.
Sure.
And so I think I would point to our closest neighbor, Canada, or my closest neighbor in Vermont.
Yep.
Because they are very, very well along in developing a really public forum for people to understand what's going on in their own communities. They track information like health indicators. They track information about the community response to individual needs, whether they think the government is doing a good job or not, whether they think that their time is being utilized the way human beings want it utilized. In other words, are they sitting in traffic for 4 hours a day, or are they able to find time to spend with their kids because they've got a child care nearby?
Right.
All of those things that indicate the quality of life are tracked pretty well by the Canadians, and you can go online and find out more about it.
Right.
And there are lots of other countries that are doing this as well, and European countries in particular.
One of the other things that is sort of a perspective or a mindset in our economy is it being based on competition. Yeah, competition amongst businesses, competition between workers, competition for scarce resources. You suggest, however, that economic models could just as easily be based on cooperation as competition. I guess questions are maybe twofold. What would that economy look like, one based on cooperation, and how might such a change in orientation and looking at the world alter our lives?
Well, the first thing it would look like is more diverse. It would be a much more diverse kind of economy, and it would be probably less pyramid shaped. In other words, the cooperative organizations would tend to be flat, would tend to be even more democratic in the decision-making arena. I think it would make us happier. There's evidence that people get pleasure from helping one another, problem solving with each other, working with a purpose on a common goal. It makes people happier, I think. This notion that we have scarce resources, I think, is a false one anyway. A cooperative organization would look at, if something were in fact scarce, how then can we stretch it? Who most needs it? You know, and the questions would be different, and we would have, I'm pretty sure, fewer billionaires. I'm not sure that we need double the number of billionaires that we had before 2008, which is where we are now.
Right, right. You offer in the book a number of other measures that might help the economy work for regular people. Yeah, credit unions you point to, universal basic income, which Wide Angle has looked at previously, local currencies. One of the things you looked at was state banks, which it sounds sort of wonky of me, I suppose, but it fascinated me. The bank in particular that you were looking at is the Bank of North Dakota, which I gather was the only system in the country that maintained a surplus across the 2008 meltdown. So no insignificant achievement there. That, while for loans, for instance, they charge in the area of 2 to 5%, when I gather across the country, the average is more in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% for loans. So it fascinates me that a system that made it through the 2008 meltdown was nevertheless, they weren't doing it by gouging people who were asking for loans to buy homes and fund educations for their children and so forth. How does that work in North Dakota?
Well, it's worked for over 100 years now, I think, and it was organized by poor farmers who didn't trust the big banks. They'd seen what had happened with too many crashes, which happened regularly, and it has a public mission. They decided that they wanted to have an institution that would support agriculture, support small businesses, and eventually, I think one of the most striking things today is their support of students and student loans, so that their interests were public interests in the public benefit. Right. So also their pay, you know, even though they were bank experts, you need those on your board. Sure. They also had public servants and regular citizens on the board who were there to make sure that the mission was met, and not to bring down inordinate salaries and bonuses, which is what you see in some of the large private banks. Right. There's nothing there to stop them except for the public. Right. So with that pretty modest goals, really, and a smaller territory, they've been very, very successful. And now there is quite a movement out there where a number of states are proposing studies of such a bank. And when I think about what I get excited about is thinking about the possibility of 50 network of 50 public banks as a kind of counterbalance to the private banking industry. Another really cool thing about North Dakota is that it has more small local banks per capita than any other state in the union. And part of their job is to support the local banks and even partner with them to take on risks that otherwise might have to go to Wall Street. You know, if the loan is big enough, people go to Wall Street. But North Dakota has been able to support their local community banks.
With being in the midst of tax season, as we are, it's appropriate to bring up taxes. And one of the neat things you speak to in the book, I think you refer to it as sort of a silly little idea you've had, but I think it's sort of neat in terms of shifting our our gaze at something different than we typically think of, particularly around tax time. You have a dream of creating what you call a caring addendum, and adding it to the standard tax return that all Americans need to fill out around this time of year. My questions are these. What does the caring addendum tally? What does it add up and take stock of? And I suppose the cynic in me thinks, okay, even with something like a caring addendum, do the sort of greedy and well-connected still find loopholes and a way around something like a caring addendum? What do you think? Tell us about the caring addendum, if you would.
They might, but we got to set the bar low so everybody gets in. You can't have too much care. So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So it's really based in the history of England, which when taxes were paid to the king back in the day before people could write, they used what were called tally sticks, which were basically a stick that acted as a receipt. You'd make the little marks on the stick, and then you'd split it down the middle so the king had a copy and you had a copy. And it was in some way a proof of wealth, your ability to create wealth and pay your taxes, and also your fealty to the government, right? So it began to be used as a currency, which is a different kind of currency from the one created from debt that we now use. And so I think it would be a great idea to have an additional currency, and I pictured it colored pink, of course, to document or to be a kind of receipt of our fealty to the government and our caring. So you have to, because you're dealing with the IRS, right? You'd have to be able to account for it.
Sure.
And so I say we could set the bar low. We could say, well, did you send your mom a Mother's Day card, or did you babysit for some kids in the neighborhood, or did you volunteer for the city commission and do your service in the establishment of a sewer system in the community, and so it would be something tangible that you would need to report and document. And in return for that, you would get a caring currency to be used for caring purposes.
Interesting.
And it would make things more, those things are the hardest to pay for. And so suddenly we would have this new pink currency to pay for those things. And you asked, would some people need to cheat on it? Maybe.
Yeah.
But it's quite likely that some would need to, but then, people would figure out how to do it. But also just having this currency that you needed to use for some caring purpose. Also having to give in a regular accounting of what caring you had done would help us to begin to rethink how we're spending our funds and how we're spending our time, and maybe even thinking about what makes us happier.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'd love to see the caring addendum in my tax return at some point in my life. My fingers will be crossed. No doubt, Rickey, there are viewers who are interested, I would think, if they've sort of been external or outside the economic conversation, maybe encouraged to find out more, to learn more about it, have a voice in developing our economy, perhaps. A sense of resources that you find useful, that you might direct people to.
Well, there are a number of organizations organized around, the economy has about 1 million different parts, and most of them need fixing in some way. So there are lots of organizations out there, which I don't think I'll single out any one or two. I mentioned the Public Banking Institute. That's a great one.
Okay.
And there are also, cooperative ownership organizations. There's an annual conference called, I think it's called Commonwealth. It's going to be in St. Louis this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I have collected a number of these resources in a workbook to go along with Screwnomics called "Where Can I Get Some Change?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually designed to help people own their own economic story, to make the economic system that I'm describing in Screwnomics and telling stories about,
Mm-hmm.
that you begin to see there are connections between my personal life. This is pretty personal, really, when I think about it.
Sure.
And so that you can claim your own economic story, which, as I say, is always rooted in some kind of conflict, but also driven by a sense of purpose that I think it's important for all of us to discover.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably easiest to do. At least I suspect that's easiest to do.
Okay.
Friends.
I'd certainly say you have a website for the book, which has resources on it as well. Yes?
Yes, right. That's
Okay.
where you can get the workbook. That's where you can find out about these conversation groups. Maybe there's one happening near you.
Very good.
I'm hoping that we'll be able to develop the resources to make that conversation bigger and bigger, and enable other people to contribute to the website and share us the ideas that you're discovering, what's working where you are.
Right, right. I thank you for taking the time today.
All right. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Good. The premise is simple. Over the past 2,500 years, the voices of women have been marginalized and their interests, economic and otherwise, considered of secondary import. The mission to shift that reality, not surprisingly, is more difficult to realize than articulate. But it would arguably help each one of us, those of every gender, income level, and political hue. We first need, suggests my guest today, to understand the vocabulary and assumptions of our current economy, as well as the tools at our disposal. We then need to bring a new value set to bear on that system, so that it can become more sensitive and responsive to the needs and hopes of all humans, including Mother Earth. On behalf of Rickey Gard Diamond, I'm Peter Bermudez. I thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.